Hey everyone, welcome to the RotoGrinders Morning Grind Podcast. I'm your host, Stevietpfl. It's Wednesday. It is March 18th. It's 2020, and we're here talking some more esports. We talked a little bit of esports yesterday on the podcast. Hey, it's the only thing up in the DraftKings lobby right now, so we're going to talk it a little bit more today. We're going to get into a little bit more betting on this podcast as well. Ask some questions that we weren't able to ask John yesterday. We're joined today by Vince Giletti, LOL, on Twitter. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm learning all kinds of new stuff. I spent 3 hours watching LOL matches at 6:00 this morning, and my wife asked me what was on the big screen. So, yes, it's been fun. I enjoy it. I've come from some video game background, so I've enjoyed this, and it's just fun learning. That's what we're having you guys on for, and hopefully, if this continues and to be a thing, we'll get you guys on again.
Sounds good to me.
All right, so yesterday we talked to John George. He was great, very helpful, taught us a lot of general information. I did have some questions from our Discord and Twitter that we didn't get to him, so I don't want to necessarily start with those questions. I want to get into a little bit more on the betting side of things, because I'm starting to see, as I'm digging in, there's a lot of different lines that you could take advantage of when it comes to League of Legends betting. So is there a specific site or something that you look at when you're wanting to bet LOL? Is there something that you feel like you can leverage betting LOL into playing daily fantasy? What's your thoughts on that?
So I use a couple different sites, and as with anything, any kind of sports betting whatsoever, you want to shop. You want to line shop and look at different books. There's a lot of offshore stuff that's good. Five Dimes, Nitrogen, Bitcoin book, Bet365's got a lot of good stuff. A lot of the European books are just carrying this stuff like normal now. Pinnacle has it. There's plenty of places that do it. So whatever you have access to, shop around, look around, and just like anything else, there's going to be different markets for stuff. And I think John mentioned it yesterday. There's a lot of variance between what you'll see on these books because they don't have experts exactly working on this stuff yet. It's a pretty soft market, relatively speaking. And you can usually tell a softer market by increased juice on a lot of stuff, like a higher VIG than people are used to. I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with the gambling terminology and everything. But typically when you see higher VIG, it means the book's less confident in their take on things. So you see a whole lot of that with esports in general, not just leagues. So.
Yeah, obviously I think we always promote using one of the books that are legal in the states that you live in. So make sure you're doing that. But, when I'm looking at and I was telling John yesterday, I've been using esportsbet.com just to kind of get lines. And that's been one that's been, close, for me, and to just kind of see who the favorites are. Do you feel I know we talked about it yesterday, but do you feel these lines are something we shouldn't be putting too much emphasis on? Or do you feel we should be looking at these lines? For instance, today, Wednesday's slate that, by the time most people are listening to this is probably going to be over. But we have NLG big time favorites over Victory 5, who probably is the worst team in the league from what I've been able to see so far. Do you put a lot of emphasis in those types of lines?
So I think a lot of times, especially early in the season, just like in, say, like the NFL, for example, a lot of times the books have a wrong read on something. It's a lot less common in the NFL where they have, a lot more information and they have advantage on their side. In this case, sometimes the books just price something wrong. So you can't always go like in the NFL. You can look at a slate of games, maybe considering it for DFS purposes, right? And say, okay, this team's a 10-point favorite. And you maybe want to avoid the team going against them, for instance, right? Unless you're trying to, create leverage through a GBV or something like that. But in league, it's a lot different because the lines aren't as accurate, just straight up. They're just not as accurate. So you can't rely entirely on them like you could, in a traditional sport or like one of the major sports. But as the season goes along, they tend to be a lot more accurate. So Like that, for instance, I like this like that line, for instance, I think is pretty accurate because Victory
Yeah,
5 is that bad. But there's a lot of
we're
lines.
kind of hoping, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, but like take a line like JDG and Billy tomorrow, right? JDG are heavy favorites, almost the same extent that um, LNG is over Victory 5. I happen to think those teams are a little closer together, but so you may want to consider that in terms of your share in JDG as opposed to like your share in another team. So I treat it. You want to treat it just like traditional sports, but you also don't want to rely as blindly as you do in traditional sports on the lines because the markets are a lot softer.
Yeah, I noticed that too with like thinking back to like Tuesday morning, early morning, Monday night, however you want to look at it. Fun plus Phoenix didn't seem like they were getting enough love in some of the books and stuff, and like they seem to be like, especially watching the matchup on Tuesday morning, like they seem to be very, very good. So like I feel like it's something as you're watching and paying attention and following along, you're going to be able to pick up on stuff like that. But I think it's a good starting point, just like any other sport. It's always a good starting point to see like who's the favorite. In kind of what I'm seeing already, four slates in, not saying that I'm an expert by any means, is the pricing kind of goes with the lines that we're seeing too. So I feel like if there's a line that you might not like a lot, maybe you're going to get some of these guys a little cheaper for DFS.
Yeah, I think for the most part it lines up. Every so often you'll see, like, you probably haven't seen anything yet, but I'd say like maybe once a week there's one that's the opposite, where maybe you'll have like a small favorite that's priced as a dog in DraftKings. Like the players on that team will be priced as underdogs, and you'll see that from time to time. And I think with the North American LCS and the European LEC starting up again this weekend, which just got announced this morning, you'll see that I think in those regions they are more frequently mispriced in terms of like their DraftKings pricing or whatever websites. So I do think generally though, like it lines up pretty close.
Yeah, let's talk those two leagues starting back up. Like that's going to be fun, right? Like we have North America and it's Europe, right? Both of those starting back up.
Yeah. So there's a
That
pretty
man.
big difference. I didn't mean to cut you off, but yeah, there's a
No,
pretty big
yeah,
difference
that's fun.
in those two. So maybe the biggest difference is that they play best of one in North America and Europe, not best of three. So we've been getting used to the LPL and some of these other regions playing best of threes. So you get points for the games not played, the GNP, right? Plus 15 on, a game not played in a series. So you really are seeking out those 2-0 victories. Whereas in North America and Europe, since they play best of one and you get a 5-game slate, there tends to be a lot more differentiation. So that's probably the biggest difference besides like the overall level of play.
Well, good for me. I at least know some of the United States teams. So I know the team names. Like that's a starting point, right?
Yeah.
I'm excited to watch some of these broadcasts and like not have everything like in Chinese, so like I can actually read what it says, and
Yeah.
that'll be fun too. So I'm excited for this weekend to just get some more slates and maybe some normal start times where we're
Yeah.
not like starting these things at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. So I'm definitely excited about that. Um, so one of the questions that I had come up was kind of going back to, again, most people when they're listening to this is not going to be relevant. But going back to look at like, I guess we're going to call it Tuesday slate, Wednesday early morning, however you want to call it.
Yeah.
We had some starting lineups come out. First question is the best source to you for starting lineups, and the second question is these starting lineups that came out, is this normal to see these guys like, for instance, Light was starting kind of out of nowhere. I feel like people, did not see that one coming. So, like, is this normal to see teams move starting lineups a lot? And who do you think is the best source or the best source to kind of get lineups from?
So I guess I'll touch on this source first. I use a combination of the team Twitters and social media, and a couple of guys I like. I'll cite at Kenzie131 is pretty spot on. Hits every single LPL slate with all the starters. And what a lot of times he does is he pulls from a lot of the Chinese social media sites that you got to go digging a lot further through unless you speak fluent, Mandarin. So uh, he does a lot of that, and that's a good follow on Twitter. He checks it every day. He also posts a lot of really cool video content too. So, um, and in terms of whether the teams actually start, this varies team to team and it varies region to region. So the LPL plays a really long season. It's a 17-team league. They play round robin, so they're going to play every team in a best of 3. That's a lot of games. So you'll often see, especially in the LPL, and especially with like the middle and bottom of the table teams, where they're trying to figure out which lineups work the best for them, or maybe if they're a young team that's trying to test out talent, uh, you'll often see them switch even in between games. There hasn't been too much of that, but I mean, you saw, I think it was Rogue Warriors on Monday morning, started off with Holder and against, I think it was Invictus, right? Yeah. Started off with Holder. He just got completely smashed by the Shy. And then they went crazy in the next 2 games and he played, a lot better. So that's just like one example. Some teams do it for talent purposes. Some teams do it just because they, like workload, like an NBA team does, where they don't want, these players burning out or whatever. But you'll learn over time too that certain teams have a tendency to do this more often than others, and unfortunately for us, it ends up burning us early in the season, and we figure out who those teams are like as we go. Yeah, it's just kind of the nature of the beast. I will say the LPL is the only place that releases. That's the Chinese league. It's the only place that releases the lineups beforehand, and none of the other leagues will do that. As a matter of fact, some of them are like vehemently against it. So probably because of betting and DFS and stuff like that. So like with the LCK, for example, they will not release anything. The casters won't release anything. The casters have commented on it before. People covering it in the thing, they are very, very, firmly against releasing that information, I guess for competitive integrity or whatever. But yeah, so the LPL is the only place that you can really get a head start on this stuff. Everywhere else, you just got to kind of do the legwork yourself and check the team's social media sites. So,
Listen, they need to understand that there's a lot of people playing esports DFS right now, and they're going to
yep.
get a lot of new views and hits on everything that they're posting. They just need to suck it up and just take advantage of the times right now. We want something to sweat. Like I actually enjoyed watching the matchups this morning. Like I said, Tuesday morning, Monday slate, whatever you want to call it. Like
Yeah.
these are weird start times, especially for people like me that are used to like NBA slates and MLB slates starting at 7:00 at night almost every night. So I'm just going to continue to call it like Tuesday slate is the one that like we're saying is not really relevant, and then we got Wednesday slate coming up. But it seems like what's kind of nice about like what you were talking about with it being 17 teams and then playing a long season, like even for at least for at least the rest of this week, we have 3-game slates almost every day. I think it was every day for the rest of this week. So I feel like that's kind of nice at least, because I'll tell you, the 2-game slate wasn't as much fun as these 3-game slates have been.
I'll say, so one of the benefits to the 6-week hiatus the LPL took is that they are actually going to complete their full season. They haven't, the word is still out on what the Korean league is going to be doing. It's the LCK. But the LPL took their break after week 1, and they came back and said, we're going to play every single game in the regular season still, which means we get 3 games a day, except on Tuesdays, until April 19th. Every day.
Sounds good to me.
Every single day. It's great. Yeah. So Tuesdays are the only days that are going to be 2-game slates. And I think the last 2 weeks, even, they're going to be 3 games just to get all the games in. So there will be plenty of action there.
Do we have any type of schedule for like the LCS yet? Do we know if they'll play, like multiple days like this too to catch up, or no?
So the LCS have announced that they're just going to they basically just skipped 1 week. The LEC and the LCS both. They just skipped their 1 week. They're just going to start back where they were. So we just missed week 8. We're just going to start at week 8 again this week with a slightly modified schedule. So the LCS typically plays on Saturday. They play 4 games Saturday, 4 games Sunday, and then 2 games on Monday night, which is a new format that they just started doing this year. They've announced that they're going to go back to the old format of 5 games Saturday, 5 games Sunday, and then Europe does 5 games on Friday and 5 games on Saturday, and that's going to stay the case for the rest of the season. But starting this weekend, both will be finishing their seasons as normal or as normal as they can. They're just going to be playing it remotely. So
Hey, listen, let's just play. Like, let's have some fun. It sounds like Saturdays are going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have
yeah,
3 leagues going and all kinds of action and fun to
just
be
like
paying
college
attention
football
to.
Saturdays, man. Just like I'm telling you, it's remarkably similar in terms of the feel, or like a football, like an NFL Sunday, where it's just all day. You got stuff
That's
going.
great.
Great.
No, it's fine with me as long as like we can kind of project what the lineups are going to be, and it sounds like for the most part, if you do the work, which is fine with me, that you'll be able to make and figure out these starting lineups ahead of time. So, all right, to shift gears a little bit, we did have some questions come in that I didn't get to ask John that I'm going to switch over and ask you here. One of them was, do high winning scores correlate with losing scores? Example, like if a team gets to 25 kills, I would assume the other team has at least 15 or they would have already lost. Do you see the correlation in that?
There's not always a correlation. There's unfortunately there's a lot of things in league that aren't directly correlated to the results. I'm sure you guys have talked about like results oriented thinking with stuff a lot, and in this case, it doesn't always mean that. Some teams will play. I mean, I know John mentioned G2 yesterday in Europe. G2 will play games that are 25-15, whereas other teams will play games that are 15-1 or even like 25-1. It depends on how much they want to style or intimidate their opponents or whatever. Most of the time, it ends up being around that cushion of a difference. So like 25 kills is a lot in a game, like for one team. That you almost never see that anymore. China, you'll see it, and some teams, outlier teams, will show it, but for the most part, it's not a strong correlation. I don't think. Like every game is going to be a little bit different. So
Yeah, we kind of saw a little bit with that on Monday's slate. Again, going back, looking at that slate, like that EDG RW matchup was kind of high scoring, because I feel like that third game in that match was just so entertaining because it was so back and forth. Like, most of the time, like you thought EDG was going to win, and then RW was just like, hey, we are going to put it on you at the very end. And like it seemed, and I feel like that was one of the reasons that we saw like a losing player on the winning lineup for tournaments. Like I, again, have only played 4 slates, but I still feel like it's very optimal not to have a losing player in your lineup, even on a 2-game slate. Maybe a little bit more lenient on a 2-game slate, but these 3, 4, 5, when we get into these bigger slates that we have more teams, like I want nothing to do with a losing player on my team.
yeah, for the most part, that's correct. I'd say it's an outlier, and we've had I think like 2 this week or something that have taken that big
That's
competition.
fine. Let people build those lineups and
Yeah,
think that
exactly,
it's possible. Like that's fine
exactly.
with me.
It's
I'm
not very
in.
likely. Like it might be a way to differentiate in big tournaments like this. Like when you're playing like a GPP with however many a couple thousand people or something, then yeah, maybe there's some kind of edge in terms of lineup differentiation that you can get. But no, I almost never do that unless I have a really good reason to. Like there are certain spots where so Rogue Warriors are an interesting case because Zamuji, the 80 carry player for them, does get a ton of kills in most of their games, even when they're getting their ass kicked, So um, there's a line of thinking that says that maybe, or if you really want to stack a certain captain, an expensive captain, maybe you could do it. But typically you don't want to be playing, especially a carry on a losing team. Like you're better off punting the team slot or a different position in that case.
Yeah, I've noticed from a lot of the stats that I've been looking at, and again, like I'm just digging into this. I'm a stats person. That's what I like to do. But like,
Same.
um, I've realized that like Puff is the dude. Like he is a guy that is just. I don't know who he is. I don't know what he looks like, but I can tell you right now, this dude, he is a beast when it comes to killing people in games. Just from the stats. So um, Doing B was really interesting to watch him play. He seemed like, man, he was a beast too. So, kind of sticking on the DFS terms, we had a couple people ask us in Discord, thoughts on putting like a support and captain for cash games to make more of a balanced lineup or a top and captain in GPP to be different. Me, again, I'm gonna let you answer this, and you're gonna have way more insight than me. But everything that I've been running, optimals dating back, looking at optimal lineups, it really almost always seems to have an ADC or a middle in the captain spot to win a tournament. But I haven't dug into too much in like the cash games and building more of a balanced lineup. Maybe you could just kind of talk on this question just in general here.
Yeah, so I think it's one of those things where it's like unless it's an extremely top heavy lineup or slate, like an extremely top heavy slate, you're gonna be able to figure out lineups that are better. Like you almost never want to be putting a support in the carrier position or in the captain position. Like there's certain teams that you could maybe see putting the top laner in that position for. Invictus are like that in the LPL because like teams that have certain carry top lane players, and I know John briefly touched on that stuff yesterday, but teams that play around their top lane, you could conceivably maybe try playing a top laner captain spot, especially if it's maybe an underdog that you think could win through their top laner. But for the most part, as boring as it is, you just want to play optimal. Like it's you've already figured that part out, I think.
Yeah, I feel like, kind of just looking back at these slates and looking at like what has won tournaments and stuff, like going optimal is fine because you could be so different with your secondary stacks. You could play a team to make it like a 4-2-1 or something along those lines. I will say that like when you look back at like, again, Monday slate, like the optimal play was doing B in captain, and like he was the guy that like was on the winning team. It's just we did not see many people play, like scout with some of these other guys from the other team. But and like, okay, it worked. I'm not going back to it. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Congratulations, get your first place prize. Do it again on a few more slates so you could pay the rake.
Exactly. I was one of the however many hundreds of people were tied in second place in that lineup this morning. So I was like, oh, okay, well, that kind of thing happens from time to time. But I think for the most part, yeah, you just want to play optimal. Like I know it's boring, but every so often you're gonna get one of these. And the cool thing about this is now with so many people jumping into this space, there's a chance that it just becomes, we talk about metagame for the actual game of League of Legends. Maybe it becomes the DraftKings metagame to go different, do something weird like that. Because if everyone's going to be on that and you really want to take one of these things down, maybe that's the case. Like if everyone starts doing that and everyone's playing optimal all the time, maybe the idea is to switch up. But I mean, I don't know if we could say that we're at that point yet. So I don't think it's correct to use improper technique or anything like that, so to speak.
I think it's definitely like that when you're looking at like these 3-game slates for like the LPL. I think we, obviously could talk a little bit more when we start seeing what type of optimals take down these LCS tournaments. But I still feel like they're going to be stacked type of lineups, just running correlations and looking at the numbers and like digging into like how the statistics of scoring works for LOL. Doing the legwork, man. Like, using those Excel skills a little bit. And I don't have a lot of Excel skills. So just looking back at all this stuff and like it, again, it just seems really optimal to not have a losing player. And like, I think we'll see that even more when we get into these bigger slates, man. I'm excited for a 5-game slate. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. So
the 5-game slates are a lot of fun because there's a lot more variance because they're best of one. So you have a lot fewer people that are all over just the heavy favorite, so because there's not those games not played points there, you're a lot more incentivized to try to maybe take a mid-level favorite as opposed to the heavy favorite. Like you maybe typically now a lot of times you want the top support and jungle from the team that's going to 2-0 in a series, right? But in the 5 best of 1 slates that you get in the LCS, and the LEC, it's a lot different. There's a lot more variance to it, so should be interesting. And I think a lot of people are going to get their first taste of that this weekend. So hopefully they put the slates up. So.
I'm sure they will. I don't see why they would have LPL up and not these other ones. Let's talk on that really quick. A lot of debate this morning whether or not it's better to have a team that goes 2-0 or 2-1. Again, using like the scoring methods and stuff, like a lot of what I was seeing 2-0 seems to be better unless it's just like an absolute bloodbath game and you're on the 2-1 side. Like it still seems optimal to be 2-0.
Yeah, I'd say the vast majority of the time that's the case. The exceptions are going to be teams that are extremely high kill, like they have extremely high combined kill. Like if you get two teams that have extremely high combined kills in the same game, that's maybe a spot where you can make exceptions or try to do something different. But for the most part, you just want the 2-0 because it's really difficult to to say reliably that this player is going to get an extra 5 kills in the next game because even carry players don't always get 5 kills per game. So you're looking at a case where you want a series that goes 3 games and at least 2 of those games are very bloody, which is a very small slice of the potential outcomes. And I think again, you're just better off looking for the 2-0s, as chalky as it sounds.
No, and I'm with you. And I feel like, again, like we're trying to build optimal lineups at the end of the day. And like that's something that, like, I feel like if you've been playing DFS, any sport you've been playing, you're always trying to build optimal lineups. And that's something that you could take from playing NBA, NFL, and stuff like that and just kind of translate it over to esports. And like roster construction is still, I feel like, one of the most important things. And I talk about it all the time: bankroll management, roster construction, and game selection. Yeah, I think, like, I was kind of looking ahead already to, I guess we'll call it Wednesday slates.
Mm-hmm.
We have like Fun Plus Phoenix and Sunning playing against each other, and I realized like both of those teams were like two kind of high kill teams, and like we could see a lot of blood, as you
Yeah,
league guys like to call it.
yeah. It's interesting because Suning didn't used to be that way, so that's kind of a new look for them, which is interesting. But Fun Plus are definitely one of the bloodier teams. Fun Plus, Invictus, G2 in Europe. Once we get there, are except like they're outlier, like exceptionally high kill teams a lot of the time. So yeah, if you end up getting a matchup like Fun Plus versus Invictus, good chance there's going to be a ton of kills. That's the kind of situation where you'd maybe consider not going for the 2-0 just to get a taste of that game, like kind of like an NFL game stack. Like I know it's not always what we want to be doing in league, but like it's that kind of principle. Like that's a spot where maybe you do take like a single player from the other team, just because if you think it's going to go to 3 games, you can get maybe an extra 6 kills in those two in that extra game or something like that. It's certainly a possibility. But again, like I think that the general takeaway from this is it's just like most other stuff. Don't get cute. Like don't overthink it. Like do
Right.
what's optimal. And if it's shown that the 2-0 is better most of the time, that's what you want to be doing.
I did find it like I'm just waiting. I haven't looked at the schedule for like next week. I'm just waiting for like E-Star to play one of these bloody teams, because from what I've seen so far, like their kind of mentality is like they're going to try to kill as much as possible here. Like, so I'm sure like teams are going to catch on. And I know you've talked about this in your blog. You tweet it out all the time, almost every day, it seems like. So like if you guys haven't already, make sure you're checking that out. It's really awesome. Like it seems like E-Star teams are going to be picking up on this. And like, going back to like the days that I played, Counter-Strike, we used to see waves and things would work for like a week. And then as soon as it like was picked up on, like you couldn't do that anymore. Like it was like flashbangs and stuff for us back there.
Yeah, it's one of the cool things is in league, because there's so many different champions and strategies and individual team styles and individual player styles. Since there's so many variables introduced in the actual game, you end up in these situations where a team might be predictable because they're running the same set play, right? It'd be, maybe it'd be like the equivalent of an NFL team running, power right like 5 times in a row, right? If eventually the other team's going to stick a linebacker there in that gap, and you're stopped, right? Now, in league, you can do that with champions. Some champions are just get figured out over time, like just pick an example from right now. Like Rumble is a character getting played in the mid lane right now. I don't want to get into all the details and everything, but it's a champion that I think like once teams get used to playing against it, they can figure out how to play around it once they're used to it more. And it usually there's like a couple weeks worth of lag time it takes these teams to catch on. Or even if it's a specific team or a specific player that does something, if there's a habit, it will get figured out a lot of the time. And it's kind of an interesting rub to the whole thing because every game is different, right? So that's one of the more interesting things is trying to figure out exactly where a metagame is going, or a habit a team has that you think could be exposed. And that's kind of like one of my specialties, and where I've had success both as a better and as DFS player is if I see something like I've gone on about E-Star a million times. That's just one example, but a lot of times, like if I see something, a pattern, I have to assume that these coaches are seeing it too, right? Like these teams have coaches, they have training staff, they go over replays, they review the stuff just like professional sports teams do. So you got to assume at some point that they're going to figure this thing out, and I think E-Star are have a good chance of being figured out. That's just one example, but yeah,
Hey, listen, that's fine with me. Figure it out. Let's take advantage of it.
yeah, fade, fade, fade. Let's go.
Right. Fine with me. All right. So we had a couple other questions, and then I'll let you get out of here. Okay, so the question is, if playing against a slower team like BLG, does that have this question doesn't make sense. That has a rep of having longer games and stays out of trouble, helps or hurts in the end? Does tempo matter?
Okay, so I think I understand what they're trying to say. So, first of all, I think that's a mischaracterization of BLG, but that's a different topic.
Okay.
So typically, you have certain teams, just like in basketball, or I keep pulling up basketball and football because they're the most relevant to me examples of the comparisons to league. Teams like that, you'll see Origin in Europe is like this. RNG had been playing like this in the LPL. There are certain teams that just prefer to play a lower variant style of play. They're less about getting after you and more about making the correct percentage decision every time. And the best way to the best example I can come up with is like a basketball team that wants to slow the clock down and play a low scoring game, or like a football team that wants to, if you're going against Patrick Mahomes, what's the best plan is to keep the ball out of his hands. You want to eat the clock, run the ball, keep it out of his hands, make him have to score on the plays that he does. So there's certain teams that do play that way. A lot of the Korean teams play that way. A lot of teams with Korean coaches will often play that way too. It's just like a hallmark of that region style of play. And you'll notice that there's regional differences, there's stylistic differences from team to team, but typically speaking, teams that play slower are going to have fewer fantasy points, just in general, just because they are not going to take those coin flip situations where I'm going to try to outplay you. I'll just have that so that I never have to be in that situation to begin with. So teams like Billy, most of the time Billy. That's why I said it was mischaracterization. But RNG are doing that a lot this season. You'll see Origin do it in Europe. Those are the best examples of coming up that I can think of. In North America, Team Liquid is like this a lot, where they just play a very low kill, like controlled style, where they want to just control the game and not make as many mistakes, or not offer the opponent the opportunity to outplay them.
All right, great information there. So, I feel like this is where, kind of watching the games, you could kind of gain a little bit of an advantage. So, you got my notebook out, watching some games. I don't ever have notebooks out when I'm watching basketball or football anymore. So maybe it's just like, we're gonna have some fun with this
You
instead
got to
of
treat it like a new thing, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, when you first imagine if you were, gambling in some way, shape, or form on football when you first started watching it. You would have been doing your homework on it. You would have been learning the game, trying to figure it out. You got to do the same kind of thing here. So, yeah.
All right. Before I let you get out of here, I had one person ask me to look ahead to Wednesday's slates. I don't know if you've looked at it yet, and just see if there was anything like really standing out to you that like you're already looking at. I feel like, Dom and WE, just looking at those guys, like I think it's the first matchup in that week or whatever they call it. It is kind of the interesting one because like the other two games are massively spread games. Just kind of looking ahead to this slate for Wednesday. Is there anything like standing out to you with any of these 6 teams?
So I gotta like backtrack though, because I usually call it Thursday. I call it the day of because I do end up watching.
Yo, that's fine.
So
I just
for
like
Thursday,
it has me so mixed up.
yeah, because the hours are whacked, right? So we have WE and Dominus. We just got to see WE this morning, and they put up a pretty good fight and against in Fun Plus, but Fun Plus are an extremely good team. So a lot of, again, like watching these games can help a lot because you get a better sense of where they actually are as opposed to just looking at the standings, right? Especially early in the season. It's too easy to be like, oh, this team's 3-3. This team's also 3-3. They should be close when one has faced a really hard schedule or one has faced a team that was not rated highly by books or by most people going into the season, but have been playing really, really well, right? So in this situation, unfortunately for that slate, I really do think it's just three dominant favorites. Like, I don't think Dominus is very good at all. I think they're going to be one of the bottom 3 or 4 teams in the league, which is kind of upsetting because they were looking pretty promising at the end of the year last year. But I think they're probably the only underdog I would take a shot on this slate, only because I think they're the closest to their opposition. Fun Plus and Invictus are 2 of the best teams in the region. And even when they're playing against like a middle of the table team, unless it's like a very specific matchup, it's going to be just as big a gap between them as it is like a middle of the table team versus a bottom of the table team. And I think typically when you're better off fading a team that's in the middle of the table than you are fading a really, really good team, unless it's someone that has bad tendencies. So in this case, I don't think there's any of those to point out. I will say that Invictus so far this season have been playing a lot, like really, really disrespectfully, meaning like there's a good chance they're going to punt some games to people, but I don't think LGD is the team to do it because I also think LGD is going to be one of the bottom teams. So unfortunately for the Thursday slate, very boring, very chalky. Like Dominus would be the underdog I'd take a shot on, but even Dominus don't exactly thrill me in that spot. I'm taking a quick look at Friday. Friday is a little more interesting. Rogue Warriors and LNG. The way Rogue Warriors have been playing, there's maybe a decent shot at them to take that, but we'll have to see what the pricing looks like. EDG, yeah, I don't know. I'm just like doing this on the fly. So
no, you're fine. That's great.
Yeah, EDG, like gut check says EDG can maybe take a game off JDG if they've had really spiked performances like EDG has, and they're kind of getting used to a new lineup. EDG have been like a perennial playoff team in the LPL for years now, and they've done so with the core of Scout and Mako. And that core has been together. Those 2 have been together for a long, long time, and they're both very, very good at their positions. They're like 2 of the best at their position really in the world. So they can do a lot of heavy lifting for that team. And their AD carry, Hope, was a big problem last year and hasn't been as much this year. So maybe there's a chance that they could take a game off JDG, who have showed, weak spots in the armor a couple times this split. But I do think JDG are probably going to end up being a top 4 team. I had them second in my preseason rankings. So yeah, that's just a little insight into Thursday and Friday. Unfortunately, Thursday's super, super chalky. Not too many underdogs I like there.
That's fine though. There's always roster construction. We get back to that. Like, yeah. So, I really appreciate you joining us, Vince. It's been fun. Again, just like I'm taking in all this information. I'm spending hours looking into all this stuff. You don't have to tell me. We did get a couple questions about like best places to look up stats. Like I've been Googling stuff. You can tell me or you can't. It's fine. I have found like if you go through like Gamepedia, you can really find just about anything that you need stats wise.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go ahead and plug 2 different sites.
Okay.
One of them is oracleselixir.com. It's Tim Sevenhusen, friend of the show. He puts out pretty advanced metrics, and he's come up with some of his own on the 4 major regions, and I think he's done a little bit for the smaller regions now too. That's a good resource for just like rate statistics and stuff like that, and it's good. And he has some different metrics he's come up with. And then I use Game of Legends or GOL.GG. That's mostly just like it's like a cleaner, more detailed Wikipedia, but with less of the historical stuff and more of the statistics. So it does a lot of the same things, just kind of like aggregates it all into one spot. And it's good. It's an easy way to navigate around a bunch of different things. And they've got it's good. It's a good resource. Those are the 2 I use the most. And then, anything else is a lot of legwork on your own, unfortunately, because it's kind of a new space. Right. You can also look, I believe Riot on the official website, you can actually look at the match histories. If you really want to dive into a specific game, you can actually go and look at their specific match history too. So yeah, those are the main resources I use. And then everything else you got to do by hand, compile it yourself, talk to your friends, all that kind of thing. So.
All right. You can check him out on Twitter at GelatiLOL. I'll link it when I tweet this out as well. Twitch.tv/GelatiLOL. His blog is posted right there on his Twitter. And like I said yesterday with John, you can check out their podcast, the Gold Card podcast, a little bit more betting than DFS, but make sure you're checking that out. That's going to wrap it up here for Wednesday. We'll be back Thursday talking something. Like I said yesterday, I don't know if it'd be esports, it'd be an interview. We're working stuff out. I know on Friday we'll have Kevin Roth talking about how weather impacts sports and how we can kind of use that to our advantage. So that's going to wrap it up. Hope everyone has an awesome day. Good luck in your contests, and we'll see you again tomorrow.